couple of weeks, I'm going to be out of town. And I kind of was hesitant. I was like, you got anybody else? but no, he said, yeah, I do, but I want you to. So here I am. And over that time, in the past couple of weeks, the Lord has kind of led me to a familiar story in the story of Joseph. He kind of told me to go back and look at the story of Joseph. And I'm thinking, I know the story of Joseph. I was raised in church. I know that story. And he's like, no, just go take a look at it. And so I went back and was reading through it, and some things did stand out to me that I didn't catch before. Again, being raised in church, sometimes we are told these stories, and we don't really go back and actually kind of look at them for ourselves and kind of analyze them and dig deep into them ourselves. And so that's what I did, and I did kind of notice some things that I hadn't noticed before in that story. But also was in this past couple of weeks, after hearing from the Lord about Joseph, I was scrolling through Facebook, and I think Miss Connie, she's not here today, but Miss Connie had shared something. It was a YouTube video by Vody Baucham, and he was talking about the story of Joseph and kind of how to look at it from a different perspective. And he was saying, how people were raised in church, they often tend to just take what they're given and don't really try to analyze it for themselves. And we kind of just to briefly go over the story of Joseph, I'm going to read kind of the synopsis, and then I want to kind of analyze actually 2 chapters. And when we hear the story of Joseph, we hear about how his dad gave him a coat. He was the favorite son. How he was blessed, and then he went to his brothers got jealous, and he got thrown into the pit, and then he went from the pit to Potiphar's house, sold as a slave, and then went from the slavery, or as Potiphar's servant, he got into some trouble and was thrown into prison, and then he was called out of prison to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And so I'm going to go through just in case anybody isn't familiar with the story, I'm going to go through it real quick, but then I want to get into kind of what the Lord has led me to show y'all here today. You mind if I pray first? Father, I just thank you for this time here today, Lord. I thank you for your people. I thank you for the words you've given me. Thank you for the ones that are here, Lord, and the ones that are not here, Lord. Just bless them and cover them and protect them, Lord. And I just pray that nothing I say here will be different than what you gave me, Lord. Just hide me behind the cross, and just let my words be your words, Lord. And I just thank you for the word you give me, and just thank you for your faithfulness. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. His mother's name was Rachel. God changed Joseph's dad's name from Jacob to Israel. Jacob gave his favorite son a coat. A lot of people have heard the coat of many colors. That was made of lots of bright colors, and Joseph loved that coat. But his brothers were very jealous because they know their dad loved Joseph more. In fact, Joseph's brothers hated him to the point where they wanted to get rid of him. One day, Joseph told his brothers about a dream he had. He told them that in the dream they were all in the field picking grain and tying it up, when suddenly Joseph's grain stood up and the brothers' grain bowed down to Joseph's grain. This made the brothers mad, and they said, "Do you think you're going to rule over us?" And then another day he had another dream, and he told his brothers about the dream. The sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Again, Joseph had 11 other brothers. And so, again, the brothers hated him even more, thinking that Joseph was telling them that they should bow down to him. So when Joseph was 17, his father Jacob, or Israel, sent him to check on his brothers who were tending the flocks of sheep and goats, because they were shepherds. When his brothers saw him coming, they talked about killing him. They kind of were devising a scheme. But instead, they took his coat and threw him into the pit that was usually filled with water, but the pit was dry at this time, and it was deep. And they talked about just leaving him and abandoning him there. And then his brother Reuben kind of was like, well, we probably shouldn't kill him. Let's try a different approach to this. And so they talked about what they should do with him. And then some Ishmaelites came along, and they decided to sell him into slavery to the Ishmaelites. And he was taken to Egypt. The brothers killed a goat and put the goat's blood on Joseph's coat to make it look like that Joseph was attacked by a wild animal. And they took the coat to their fathers and pretended like they found it that way. And their dad put on the sackcloth, the ashes, and he was just weeping. It was his favorite son. He thought his son was dead. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to a man, Potiphar, who worked for Pharaoh. The Lord loved Joseph, and Potiphar could see that, so Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his entire household. He trusted Joseph with everything he owned. And then one day, Potiphar's wife told a lie, saying that Joseph was a bad person, that she wanted to do some things that he wasn't exactly wanting to do, and so she kind of turned it around on him, made him out to look like a bad guy, and so Potiphar had him thrown into prison. And so while Joseph was in prison, he met two men. Both men had once worked for the Pharaoh, but the Pharaoh had them put in prison. One was the cupbearer and one was the baker. Both men had a dream that night. One night, Joseph told them what their dreams meant. Everything Joseph told them came true. A couple years later, the Pharaoh had two dreams and was told that there was a man in prison who could tell what his dreams meant. The Pharaoh sent for Joseph and told him the dreams. In one dream, he had 7 nice fat cows and 7 skinny sick cows. The skinny sick cows swallowed up the nice fat cows. In the second dream, he had 7 nice heads of grain and 7 withered, thin heads of grain. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 nice heads of grain. And Joseph told him that these dreams mean the same thing. There would be 7 years of great abundance where everything would grow, and then there would be plenty for everyone to eat. And then for 7 years there would be famine where nothing would grow. There would be no food for anyone. So Joseph suggested that Pharaoh put someone in charge who would save up for food for the next 7 abundant years so they would have food to eat during the 7 years of famine. So the Pharaoh put Joseph in charge, and Joseph was in charge of the entire palace and all the people of Egypt. Only Pharaoh was greater than Joseph. So when we read this story, and we read it from the angle of, Joseph was faithful to God, and so even though he went through some things, he went to Pharaoh's house, and he was put in second in command of one of the most powerful countries at that time. And we look at that story like, yeah, Joseph was blessed. That's awesome. And we kind of move on. Like when we teach that to our kids, that you stay faithful to God, He'll make you rich and powerful and famous. And that's not exactly what this story is about. And that's not about what our walk's about. It's not about the blessings. It's not what we can get out of God. We can remain faithful and still be struggling. We can remain faithful and still be struggling to make ends meet. It's not all about the physical, what you see and what you get from Him. It's not about that at all. It's more or less the things that you don't see, right? The kingdom of God is not seen with eyes. So it's everybody kind of looks at this story that because of His faithfulness that all this happened, and that is true. If we're faithful to God, He will make provisions for you. He will help His people. But it goes a little deeper than that. So if you look at Genesis, Genesis appears to be structured around a recurring phrase, Ella Toledot, meaning these are the generations, with the first use of the phrase referring to the generations of heaven and earth, and the remainder marking individuals like Noah, the sons of Noah, Shem, etc., down to Jacob. So so the generations are Adam, Noah, Shem, Terah, Ishmael, Isaac, Esau, Jacob. And so each time it says the Toledot formula occurring 11 times in the book of Genesis is delineating its sections and shaping its structure, serves as a heading which marks a transition to a new subject. So really this story about Joseph is not about Joseph. It's about Jacob. It's about the bloodline of Jacob continuing on and carrying on. We can learn a lot from Joseph's story, but it's really, when it comes down to it, it's about Jacob. And Joseph even kind of reads his story that way. So if you want to turn to Genesis 41, I want to start off in 37. I'm going to read all the way through 57. And so I just told you I just gave you the groundwork for that. Joseph had these dreams. When he was with his brothers, he had 2 dreams. When he was in prison, he had 2 dreams. And then now the cupbearer remembered Joseph and called him to Pharaoh, who had 2 dreams. And so Joseph told him about the dreams, the 7 years of plentiful goodness, the 7 years of famine. And he told Joseph how to prepare for it, which I just read all that. So this is where Pharaoh is talking to Joseph here, starting in chapter 41, verse 37. It says, the proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find anyone like this, a man who has God's Spirit in him? So Pharaoh, you got to remember, he's a pagan king. These Egyptians do not follow the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're pagans, and so there's a lot of irony in these. When I was listening to Pastor Vodi Balkum, the video that Ms. Connie shared, he was pointing out a lot of ironic situations here, because when we read this story a certain way, we just kind of overlook all this and we don't even really analyze it. But this is a pagan king recognizing the Spirit of God in this man. And that's pretty ironic, because his brothers back at home, who were raised in the covenant, who were, a lot of Genesis talks about seed, land, and covenant. It talks about God tells Abraham he's going to, have a seed for him, and he gives him a land, makes a covenant. So his brothers are in the covenant, and he has a dream, and they don't even accept it. That dream is from God. So his brothers in the covenant are not accepting the word of God, but this pagan king is saying, surely this man has God's spirit in him. It's kind of ironic that a pagan king recognizes the spirit of God, but not his own brothers in the covenant. So can we find anyone like this, a man who has God's spirit in him? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all these things known to you, there is no one as intelligent and wise as you are. You will be over my house, and all my people will obey your commands. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you. So he said he'll be over his house. That's not the house that Joseph was intended to be over. That's a pagan household. Again, he's from the covenant people. He should be over the house of Canaan. If we're really looking at this from a perspective of, the covenant and so it's ironic that all these things are happening to Joseph. He said, only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, see, I am placing you over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him with fine linens and garments, and placed a gold chain around his neck. So we read that and we're like, man, he's blessed. He's got a ring, he's got the robe. But if you think about it, what identified him earlier? His robe. The robe his father gave him from his land of covenant. So now he's in a foreign land, a pagan land, given a robe from a pagan king. He's given a pagan, nothing about this story really should be telling us that this is awesome. Really it's kind of like, if we're reading it from an honest perspective, it's kind of like, it's kind of strange that he's, over a completely different land. So he gets the clothes, he gets the garments, the gold chain, and he had Joseph ride in his second chariot, and servants called out before him a brek, which that's mean to like attention or something. He placed him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but no one will be able to raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt without your permission. So again, he's been put over the land of Egypt, and been he's been put second in charge, and that's one of the most abundant lands at the time. One of the richest lands is Egypt, most powerful land at the time in this setting. So this is where it's also interesting. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name, might butcher this, Zaphanath-Paneah. So he also changed his name. There's another place in the Old Testament where Daniel try to change his name to, Belshazzar or something like that. And we don't think, hey, that's awesome. We say, oh, hold up, he's with the covenant people of God. He shouldn't have his name changed. But we look at Joseph and we're like, yeah, Zaphanath-Paneah, cool, he got his name changed. And so that's another ironic situation there. So he gave him a wife, Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest at On. And so not only is he living in a pagan land, given robes by a pagan king, now he's given a pagan wife. And there's a verse in Ezra, I think it is, that says, put away your foreign wives. Now that's not saying that their ethnicity is bad, not saying where they're from is bad, but it's saying they were pagans. And so if God's saying this in one part of the Bible, saying, and we're like, okay, yeah, we need to put away, but then Joseph, has a pagan wife. So if we're really reading this honestly, he's not as blessed as we say he is when it comes to the physical, when it comes to the eyes. He's blessed with the stuff, but he's in a foreign land, away from his family. I mean, I'm sure he went through some trials, and even though he had all the stuff, I'm sure it was still tough. So he was given the different name. He was given the wife. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvests, just like Joseph said. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance like the sand of the sea. That's an interesting phrase there. He said like the sand of the sea. That's what God told Abraham, that he would have generations. His seed would, his sons would be like the sand of the sea. So that's in there for a reason. Again, there's recurring themes in Genesis of seed, land, and covenant. So like the sands of the sea, that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. So he's just bringing in all this grain and it's beyond measure. And things are going good for him. But then there were 2 sons born to Joseph before the years of the famine. And so this is an interesting thing here, what he names his sons. This is a very telling of how he views his story and how he views his situation. So Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest at On, bore them to him. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house. So if you have a pen, you want to underline that Manasseh. So God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house. So, he could have been, somebody could have approached him and maybe had a conversation with him, like, oh, hey, Zephaniah, seems like you're doing very well here in the land of Egypt. You got your, you got your ring, you got your robe, you got your chariot. You're in command of one of the most powerful countries that the world's ever seen. And now I see you have a son. So what did you name your son? And he'll say Manasseh. And Manasseh's Hebrew. But he's been given an Egyptian name, a pagan name. So it's funny that he names his son a Hebrew name. So basically what he's saying is Pharaoh can change my name, but he can't name my children. I'm still with the covenant people of God. And I bet it may be in this land, in this foreign land, but I'm still with the covenant people of God. And it's interesting what that name means. God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house. You could be thinking like, wow, you were here in this land and you got all this, but you're naming your son Hebrew? And weren't your brothers Hebrew? Didn't they try to kill you? Didn't they try to put you into slavery? Joseph says, Manasseh, I let that stuff go. God has made me forget about my hardship. And so some of us need some Manasseh in our lives, right? Some of us have had some things happen to us that we just need to get past. We just need to forget it and help God. Pray to God, to help us forget it. He probably couldn't have forgot these things without forgiving his brothers. He probably wouldn't be in the situation he was in if he was not forgiving his brothers. If he was just kind of, down in the dumps, like, yeah, I had a bad life, I was thrown into slavery, and he was just angry and bitter, I don't think God would have blessed him like he did here. So a lot of us need to take that word Manasseh and apply it to our lives. You may have had a rough childhood, you may have had a bad relationship, but now you're in the covenant people of God, and so it's time to let some of that stuff go and move on. So Manasseh. The second son was named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fruitful, and get this, in the land of my affliction. So again, a lot of us say, he's blessed, he's in the land, he's got all the house, he's got the chariot, but he calls it the land of his affliction. And that's really telling to me about the story of Joseph, because if he's got all this stuff and he's calling that the land of his affliction, it's because he's not in the presence of Yahweh. He's not in the presence of God. He's not back at his covenant home. So this place right here is our land of affliction. We can have the stuff. We may have a house. We may have a nice car, and there's nothing wrong with that, having goals and having nice things. But you have a job to do here, and this is the land of your affliction. This is not your permanent home. This is just a tent, so to speak. This is temporary. Everything here on this earth is fleeting. And this is the land of our affliction. So it doesn't matter if you got the ring, you got the robe, if you're not in the presence of God, there's nothing that's in comparison to that. So this is the land of our affliction. That's the land of Joseph's affliction. So it's interesting that he recognized that. He named his son Ephraim. He didn't say, God has made me fruitful in the land that I love. He said the land of my affliction. And again, we're blessed to be born in this country. I think we're all blessed, but we got to be careful to not let the stuff get to us. I've heard a phrase that a lot of people back in the day, people loved people and used things, and nowadays people use people and love things. So it's kind of flip flopped. We got to be careful not to let the stuff determine how blessed we are, if that makes sense. Because again, you could be faithful and you could still go through trials and stuff. And God's faithful to bring you through that. So it's interesting in the name of his sons, Manasseh, maybe meaning forget, kind of let stuff go. So he let go of his past. He didn't let his brothers bother him anymore. He forgave them. And then the second son, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So then the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every country, but throughout the land of Egypt there was food. Extreme hunger came to all the land of Egypt, and the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told all Egypt, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you," because the famine had spread across the whole country. Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Every nation came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, for the famine was very severe in the land. So you see Joseph's dream came to pass. So Joseph's brothers heard, after that, Joseph's brothers heard that there was grain in Egypt. And so his father sent his brothers to come and to buy some grain. And when he did the first time, the brothers didn't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognized his brothers. And there was one more son that Jacob had as his favorite son from the wife he loved, and that was Benjamin. And whenever they came, Joseph noticed that Benjamin was not with him. So Joseph was kind of doing a series of tests. So he sent them. They came to buy grain. He sent them back, and he said, "Hey, come back with you tell me." He accused them. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. He accused them of being spies at first. He was like, "Y'all are spies from the land of Canaan." They said, "No, surely not. We have a father and 12. We have 12 brothers. One of them died." And so they told him his life story, and Joseph knows all this. It's their brother. He recognizes them, but he doesn't. But they don't recognize him. So he sends them back, and he has some money. He leaves their money in the top of their bag. So he kind of tests them there, and he tells them to come back with Benjamin. And they go home. And their dad's like, "No, you're not leaving with my only other favorite son, like you can't take Benjamin." He's like, "You've already taken Joseph, or Joseph's already dead. If Benjamin dies too, like I will surely die." Like his life, he's saying his life is wrapped up with the boy's life, Benjamin's life. So at first he was like, "No," he's like, "We're not doing that." And then some time passes, and he's like, "Yeah, we're out of food again, so we're going to have to do that. So go ahead and send Benjamin." And so Benjamin comes with them, and there's another test. He puts his gold cup in his Benjamin's bag, and then he sends them out, and they find the cup and they bring them back. And it's interesting because I was saying like that the whole of Genesis is about the seed and stuff, and so that's why the story isn't really about Joseph. It's about the seed, because there's somebody that took up for Benjamin, because Joseph, planted the cup in his bag, and they busted him for it, and he was like, "Hey, you're staying here. Y'all can go back to your dad, but whoever stole that cup, they're staying here, and I'm going to imprison them." And one of his brothers, who happens to be who the bloodline of Jesus runs through, as I was looking through this, it's Judah. If you look at the actual, seed of the bloodline of Jesus, like Judah is the one that carries the what would it be called, like the promised seed. And so Judah comes up and he offers to be a replacement for Benjamin. So it's kind of ironic there too that the seed, one of the seeds of Jesus offers himself up as a replacement for someone that's going to be serving a sentence. Kind of like us, Jesus offered himself up so we don't have to serve that sentence. And so it's very interesting that Judah came up and took the place and offered to take the place for Benjamin. And Judah's like, "Look, man," he's like, if we don't let our brother go back, like my dad's going to die. Like he's going to freak out. He's like, "Just leave me here. I will serve his punishment. Just let my brother go free." So the very seed that comes down from Jesus is offering himself up as a atonement, as a sacrifice for this that was done. And so that's pretty interesting, I thought. And so he does that, and he's like, so basically we're going to skip to Genesis 45 here. Basically all that happens, and Joseph he just can't contain himself anymore. It says, Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all his attendants. So he called out, send everyone away from me. No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers, but he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it. And also Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. So they haven't seen their brother in like 13 years probably. And they're just like, "Whoa, hold on." He's like, "Hey, it's me, guys." And so they're kind of taken back by that. So then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be worried or angry with yourselves for selling me here. And this is where it gets good. He says, because God had sent me ahead of you to preserve life. He didn't say God has sent me ahead of you so I can be blessed and I can have a robe and I can have a ring and I can be like, "Yeah, we made it," like, woo. He sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. So even way back here in Genesis, God made provision for Jesus to come and be an atonement for us. It says He did this. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land. He did it to preserve life, to protect the seed. And so when we're looking, down, analyzing it, yes, he was blessed. But in the grand scheme of things, it's so much bigger than that. It's not all about just the stuff. So it says, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over the land of Egypt. Return quickly to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your sheep, cattle, and all you have. There I will sustain you, for there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you, your household, and everything you will have will become destitute. So basically, just like I said, basically what I got from this is that it's bigger than the blessing. It's not about the stuff. He was making provisions for his people a long time ago. And sometimes we get a little comfortable in those provisions. I've heard Joseph said this was the land of his affliction that he was in. And this is kind of, this earth, this time here is kind of the land of our affliction, But Joseph still did what he had to do. He still did what God called him to do. And so we have a job to do. We have a job to plant seeds. We have a job to go out and preach the gospel and be ministers to one another. But it's not all about the material stuff, and that's Joseph's story telling you that he didn't go to Egypt just to get blessed. He went to Egypt to preserve the bloodline, to preserve seed, so his father would have a place to settle, and so there's a thing I heard someone say. It's kind of comparing like our time here. Disney World, if you think about Disney World, like all the fanfare, all the stuff, you got Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, you got the rides, you got all this stuff that you can do, and you can just go in there and get lost and spend a whole day, and if not more, in Disney World. And so I heard somebody kind of compare our life to that. Sometimes we get caught up in the fun and all the stuff that goes on, and so there was a child, going through Disney World, and eventually he got separated from his father because he saw some games, and he started going over there playing games, and he was just having fun. Not aware that his father was looking for him, and he's just over there having fun, and his father's freaking out looking for him, and he finds him, and he was all distracted, So sometimes that's like us. We could get distracted, playing church, playing games, having fun. There's nothing wrong with having fun and relaxing every now and then, but we have a job to do, and we have to get in this fight. We can't just stand on the sidelines, or we could have the Father looking for us, and we just completely miss it. So, I think that's all I have. I did kind of want to read this word here. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce it right. Miss Amanda found it for me. It was a phrase that I kind of thought of when we did like a Easter. What was it? No, it wasn't Easter. It was like a Seder dinner. It was like a Passover Seder dinner we did, and there was this phrase that was called. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. It sounds like "dayin or "dayin and it says it would have been enough. And so that kind of I thought applied to this, because even if God didn't bless Joseph with the stuff, I think he would have said, die in you. It would have been enough. Just because he was in the place that he was supposed to be, doing the job that God wanted him to do, I think he would have been satisfied, would have said, die in you. It would have been enough. Even if he didn't give him the ring and the robe, it would have been enough that he was in the land of his affliction. He was in the place he was supposed to be, doing what God had told him to do. And he was advancing the kingdom, protecting the seed. And that's what we need to do, is advance the kingdom whenever possible. We're in our land of our affliction. It may not always be pretty, and sometimes it might be awesome. But we can't let those good times blind us from what God, what we're really supposed to be here for. Don't let the provisions of God kind of get you lost and I can just coast now. We're good. We got to get in the fight. We got to stay vigilant. We got to preach the gospel and use words if necessary, I've heard Pastor Chet say. So that's pretty much all I got. So if anybody else has anything, comments or questions or prayer requests, anything? Okay, cool.